The Archdiocese of Chicago is a vibrant and diverse faith community. We celebrate our faith through worship, evangelization, and reaching out to the needy. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Welcome, everybody. This is Bob Gilligan of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, and thank you for joining our podcast here today, the Catholic Conference Hour. Probably won't be an hour, but it'll be at least 20 minutes or so. And we are pleased today to be talking once again about a subject we've covered in the past, and we'll continue talking about it because it's going to be a real hot topic, if you will, at the General Assembly in Springfield this upcoming legislative session. That topic is assisted suicide, legalization of assisted suicide, that is. Today is the 23rd of January. So what we are in the process right now is legislation has been introduced already. There's two bills this session. One is Senate Bill 9 that would legalize assisted suicide. It's been introduced in the Illinois State Senate. And also there's an accompanying bill in the House, House Bill 1328, and that has been introduced in the Illinois State House by State Representative Robin Gable. So for insiders like us, that basically means that it looks like the proponents are definitely going to be pushing this year for hearings and to try to pass legalization of assisted suicide. You may recall last year legislation was introduced, but it was never heard in a committee. But this year we're pretty sure that it will be. We've talked about this in the past, and we've kind of taken the arguments on the subject, which is mostly the arguments that we've been making at the state capitol in Springfield about why it should not be passed. Today, though, we're going to take a slightly different approach, and we're going to go back to our roots, if you will. We're going to talk about some of the theological and philosophical reasons why assisted suicide is bad in terms of legalizing it. So today, we're going to be joined by Father Chris Saliga. He is here in the Chicago area. He's in River Forest, Illinois. He was associate pastor at St. Vincent Ferrar. He's been in the military. He was a veteran. I believe he's a nurse in the military. And now he's a chaplain at Sisters of St. Dominic in Justice, Illinois. Father Chris, are you with us?
Yes, happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much for taking some time. I know we've been talking about this for probably upwards of 6 months to a year on getting you in, so finally we did it. Better late than never. So thanks for taking some time this morning. You know, about a year ago, I'm grateful that you sent to me some documents that you had written on this topic. So you've produced some information about it. One of the documents, I believe, was called Freedom to Flourish. It was a Catholic analysis about assisted suicide laws, about assisted suicide, and also a publication called Do No Harm. And I know you've written extensively about this topic. And it's interesting that in the past we've had, like I said, we've had lawmakers on, we've had representative of various interest groups to talk about the sort of the secular reasons on why this is a bad idea. But today I thought we'd take kind of a different approach and kind of go back to our roots, if you will, and talk about some of the theological and philosophical reasons why this is a bad idea. I think it's interesting, and we've talked about this in past programs, that, for example, in the state of Oregon, where this is passed, Oregon is one of the few states that requires some information to be captured by people who are requesting drugs to end their life. Unfortunately, in other states where this is passed, those requirements have really not been in law. So we can learn a little bit from Oregon in terms of why people have decided to do this. And we found it interesting that in the state of Oregon, some of the reasons for taking this are not exactly what the proponents purport as the reasons why this should be passed. Compassion Choices is a leading interest group on this topic, and they will often say that this needs to be passed to alleviate pain and suffering at the end of one's life. People who have received a terminal diagnosis, less than 6 months to live, they do not want to suffer pain at the end of life, so therefore they would like the option of taking these pills in order to end their life in a peaceful manner. Yet in Oregon, we find that when people are asked, pain and suffering is actually the fourth most frequent response. There's other reasons that people give, and mostly those have to deal with lack of autonomy. People feel that they can no longer participate in their daily life as they did. People are afraid that they're going to be a burden on their family members and that kind of thing, which plays into sort of the Catholic notion of, I think where you've been writing about is, What does it mean to be free in this society? What does freedom mean? Where does our freedom end? Where does our freedom begin? Talk a little bit about some of the things that you've put forth in your publications that I just mentioned as it relates to autonomy and freedom and this very controversial topic.
So in my modest contributions, what I have tried to do, what I've written is geared toward a general audience, a general Catholic audience. And the two documents you mentioned are these little booklets that were published through the Knights of Columbus Catholic Information Service, which is a service that the Knights provide to help ordinary Catholics in the pew better understand why we hold what we hold. And so the main thinker behind what I have shared on this is a 20th century theologian by the name of Servais Pinckaers. Pinckaers was a Belgian Dominican, and he had quite a career, but for a pretty big chunk of it, he taught foundational moral theology at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, okay, where Dominicans sort of form a theological faculty there. He wrote in French. His great work, his really great work, is entitled, in English translation, The Sources of Christian Ethics. I don't recommend people read that because it's a heavy, heavy read and it presupposes a lot. But there's a more recent publication, I forget the publisher, but it's called Morality, the Catholic View. The translator is Father Michael Sherwin, OP, who is at Freiburg, and he is an American Dominican of our Western Dominican province here in the United States. That's Morality, the Catholic View. And what Pinckaers did was renewed. He was doing a renewal of theology by going back to the sources, going back to patristics, medieval thinkers, so on and so forth, and helping us understand what the church holds. And so he came up with a theological idea of freedom that is not his own. It's rooted very much in the fathers of the church, Thomas Aquinas and others, and he calls it freedom for excellence, and he considers it vis-a-vis what he calls freedom of indifference. So in my work, I use autonomy as what he calls freedom of indifference, which is I'm a choice-making agent. I can choose between all kinds of contraries, all kinds of things, and there's no real continuity in my choices. It's like I'm just able to make choices more or less reasonably, and anything that would impinge upon that, even if justifiably so, would in some respects limit my freedom. And that's a problem, because if I think that way, there's no way that I can ever really understand my freedom as it is fully rooted in God. Because if you follow the logic of it, in my thinking, I would at least implicitly pit God's freedom against my freedom. And I would see God as a kind of imperium paternale, a kind of this paternal figure impinging on me. And I might even want to rebel against that. So that would be how I use autonomy in my writing, in what Pinckaers calls freedom of indifference. But freedom to flourish, rather than pitting God's law against my law, is really, you can say it's God's law plus my law, or God's law interiorized by me. My participation in divine law is also what people call natural law. And that's rooted in a very content-rich understanding of human nature that some argue against, but the church holds. And so this would be a human freedom fully expressed with a real understanding of divine presence, but not a divine presence that destroys my freedom, but divine presence that makes me freer to flourish. And so when we think about it that way, vis-a-vis a question like assisted suicide, we can start thinking in a whole new way about how the church's no to assisted suicide is a deeper yes to my fullest embrace of his gift of my freedom to flourish, and along with being a social agent. And so this natural law, we can think of these things called natural inclinations. And really, we can start to understand that any direct violation of one or more of those inclinations would, in some respects, if not intentionally so, at least implicitly contravene my human nature. And we would call those actions that are contrary to human nature. Some call those intrinsically evil. I don't like that language because people jump to a conclusion that the church saying that this is definitively wrong is a demonization of everybody who goes down this path. And the church doesn't say that. Judgment is God's alone.
Right.
So anyway.
I'm wondering if you have any comment about this. I've been thinking a lot about this subject because we're constantly talking about it and talking to lawmakers about it. And I wonder if you have any reaction to this. I think the fact that we're talking about legalizing assisted suicide is in some ways a sign or a symbol of our failure as a society to reach out to people who are in vulnerable and difficult situations, who, as I said earlier, the reasons that they're asking for this is they feel like they've lost their autonomy. They can't do what they used to do. And I'm wondering if it's partially reflective of a breakdown of the family, where people don't have family that would care for them, so therefore they're looking for, if you will, to end their life. And also if it's a society writ large where somebody is actually contemplating ending their lives, and when options such as palliative care are available to them.
Yes, so palliative care, comes from the word pall, like a pall that we drape over a coffin at a funeral that points to the fact of our baptism, to cover over, palliare, literally the Latin infinitive, to cover over, from which we get palliative. So we cover the pain, we cover the suffering. An act of assisted suicide or an act of euthanasia is designed to definitively end suffering, right? But it in and of itself, it doesn't give anything. So when we think here in the United States, we can think about family, we can think about many, many issues. But one of the challenges we face is kind of a laissez-faire and deeply American understanding of freedom.
Yep.
Which we kind of conflate autonomy, autonomos. I'm a law, I'm a norm unto myself. I'm my own reference point. There's no reference point outside of that unless it impinges upon that in some way, or unless I consent to it, there's good reason to have consent laws. I'm not poo-pooing that, but just at a deeper level, right? If I'm thinking that way, it becomes very hard for me to see that a law that says, don't do this, is involved in a deeper yes. So, for example, let's say that they legalize for so-called recreational purposes. It would be a misnomer. Crack cocaine. It's dark, but let's think about it. So crack is a substance that, at least in some cases, is instantaneously addictive. Okay? Mm-hmm. Not to say that everything's addictive, but there are decisions we can make because we want to make them that can definitively end some of our greatest goods. And for Americans, it's really hard to understand how my freedom is most deeply rooted in something more than just myself. So a couple analogs to think about would be most people have learned. Most people have embraced the fact that they're learners. They're natured. They're inclined to want to know truth, right? And so let's say that I want to learn to play the piano. Like right now, I'm free to listen to Billy Joel or Liberace or, I don't know, Elton John. Think of any pianists you want to think about, right? I am free to sit down and learn the piano. but I am not free to play their music right now because the virtue of art, which is that virtue understood classically by which I bring order rooted in truth and beauty to matter. Being a musician is part of that. I can bring order to sound. I am not free right now by that virtue specified through an ability to play the piano to sit down and play the piano man or something like that, okay? But I'm free to learn it and acquire it. So to learn music theory, to in a sense get music inside of me, the physics of it implicitly, right? Like music theory as a participation in physics, okay? And it's like kind of like natural law or human nature or human freedom as a participation in something that makes me flourish more fully. So once I get that music theory and performance chops and all that stuff in me, now I can flourish. And if I take it to the nth degree, maybe God has given me the aptitude to be one of the finest musical virtuosos, not just performing, but producing the best music ever written. Wow, full flourishment. People understand that. And you see, Pinker's in his thought uses those kinds of analogs. He uses learning the piano, he uses language acquisition, and sports. Learning a sport, all those kinds of things as analogs or metaphors for how we become moral virtuosos, not by being plastic statues all rigid, like, but no, fully flourishing and dynamic, filled with fire. Our passions, our desires, brought to a fullness of joy and a fullness of flourishing. And so, in my many years of practice, I started out as a medic in the Army and a paratrooper 40 years ago. 40 years ago today, I was stationed in South Korea, working as a private, a newly minted combat medic in a clinic. And I would progress through becoming a nurse. And I've seen suffering, death, and dying in many forms. And I've seen amazing things at bedsides of many dying people. And what I've seen with people of faith, not just Christian faith, some other faiths as well, not lose hope and slip into the kind of despair that might lead to suicidal ideation because of deeper premises, okay? Deeper principles, deeper things revealed if they believed in a revelatory God like we do, and a sense that they are really tapped into something greater and that they're moving, we might say in Catholic lingo, they're on a pilgrimage. They're moving on a journey. You could say a sacra via, a sacred way, a sacred path, a sacred journey. And they're passing, right? They're passing, and they have serenity about that. They have serenity about that.
We have a couple minutes left, not many, but I wondered if you would make a comment about an observation I've had about this topic that, and this is running, I think, through many public policy debates today. It seems like in our country today, we have kind of conflicting values of, there seems to be a strong libertarian sense in many people that they don't want to get involved with telling somebody else or advocating for a policy or a law that would prevent somebody from doing something, even though they themselves would never do it and think it's morally wrong and destructive to society. It seems like that is our biggest challenge right now in terms of how do we move that needle to convincing more of the libertarian thought in us that, no, there are certain, I think you had described this earlier about objective truths, moving us towards that way so they can see the damage that they're causing by supporting policies such as assisted suicide to society at large. I sense with a lot of lawmakers is I can understand this, they have people coming to them, they don't want to suffer, they're in pain, and they want to help address that situation. And what we're trying to make the case to them, the argument to them is that that is honorable to try to alleviate somebody's suffering, but on the other hand, you're creating more societal havoc in doing so, so please say no to this, and there's other solutions that are on the table.
Yes, so helping them think not only on an individual level, but on a specific level, meaning a level that involves us as a species, you might say. I don't have a quick answer on that, but
no.
I always encourage people to continue reasoning metaphorically or by analog, and maybe helping that libertarian to think, find the common ground. What are some current laws with which the libertarian would agree? Maybe this particular libertarian may or may not agree with something like a seatbelt law, or may not agree with norms of an industry that would argue for airbags in cars, or would agree or disagree, or maybe at least see the reasonability of it and see it as, yes, this is intelligible. Something like infection control policies in hospitals, okay, where maybe I've got a patient in my hospital who has chickenpox. And for the good of everybody else on that floor, that person has to be in isolation until the virus has run a certain course. And but that patient, him or herself, could see his or her participation in that as a gift given to everybody else on that floor, rather than in kind of like, think of Ayn Rand, think of the fountainhead and how we're blowing up the building because it's not to his perfect idea, and that's her hero. No, someone who understands and agrees with most modern psychologists, I would say probably all of them, that among other things, human persons are social persons. We're social animals. We live in relationship with one another. And there are some things that are good for the entire species. And something like assisted suicide can indicate a kind of abandonment or a kind of negligence or a kind of refusal. Could be the refusal of an insurance company. Insurance companies have to make money. We're a free market economy. We all understand that. We're not naive. But it could be as simple as, hey, wait a minute. We can control pain and we can help people understand their freedom most fully. And I would close by saying, even those who understandably operate clinically, saying we've got to respect autonomy. Well, that's what informed consent laws and norms in hospitals are based. That's what that stuff is based upon recently. But you could also say informed consent policies can even better be rooted in the notion that we want to reduce a person's lack of knowledge with knowledge to help them make the best possible decision, regardless of what's legal, the best possible decision for them as members of the species. And me removing myself from that, and if I'm co-opting a clinician into that, wait a minute. Maybe that clinician sees something I don't see, right? And so maybe that clinician can actually help me see that I'm not lacking in the level of human freedom I think that I'm lacking in. And they can look at reference points. Think of Viktor Frankl, his little essay, Man's Search for Meaning. Arendt, other such 20th recent philosophers, right? Looking at human freedom, human flourishing through different lenses than the one through which I consider it. And there's a lot of really rich stuff there that helps us understand, no, we're not just autonomous, we're free to flourish. And how does all of this weigh into our better helping people flourish as they're approaching that horizon called death, as even they're actively dying? And I would just, one last thing, I'm sorry to talk so much, but Some of what these folks react against, we could talk about a euthanistic extreme. We could also talk about a vitalist extreme. And so to help people understand it, you can hold everything I just said and not use ventilators, not use tube feedings, not use any of that stuff.
Right.
And literally shepherd, nurse someone through this active process of dying, recognizing that their loss of appetite is also a part of their systematically shutting down. So we don't have to throw every bell and whistle.
Exactly. Father Chris, thanks for taking some time here today to kind of go over these issues. It's very helpful to us to kind of understand sort of this at a higher level than we're used to discussing these sort of pragmatic public policy arguments. And thank you for what you've written. Once again, the two publications that I'm aware of, and there might be more, is Do No Harm, something that you put out recently, as well as the document that you talked about, Freedom to Flourish. If people wanted to get a copy of those or read that, what's the best way to get a hold of those booklets?
Yes, so they're a little dated now, but they're not dated in terms of their theology, okay? Right. And they're great launch pads to read Pinker's Catholic morality, the Catholic view for themselves. So the best way to get these is to go to the Knights of Columbus Catholic Information Service, okay? And I'm just pulling up here so I can see my own title. The one was co-authored by Jason Negri, who's an estate attorney, and myself. So it's Negri and Saliga. The title is Freedom to Flourish, a Catholic, okay? And that's the more recent of the two. The one that goes back a little further is called Do No Harm, a Guide to Human Dignity and Morally Sound End-of-Life Care. And I would simply say the numbers on those, so Catholic Information Service, Knights of Columbus. So the Do No Harm book is numbered CIS, that stands for Catholic Information Service, CIS 338. And where'd this other one go? Give me a second if I can find it here. What did I do with that?
It's coming up on the screen now.
CIS 339.
Yep, it's our producer just pulled it up on the screen so people could see the cover of the Do No Harm, a Guide to Human Dignity and Morally Sound End-of-Life Care. And also the other one you mentioned is the Freedom to Flourish, a Catholic Analysis of Doctor-Prescribed Suicide and Euthanasia. And that's the one you did with Jason Negri, who has written about this topic as well. That
one, by the way, is the one that really explicates Pinker's distinction. Okay, the one that is Do No Harm looks at key ethical and religious directives for Catholic health. So there you go.
Yep.
That's Freedom to Flourish. That's going to get you into Pinker's with some cases. The other one is going to get you into things like what constitutes human nature, and what does it look like making decisions with that in mind, and bearing in mind things like the Catholic ethical and religious directives for healthcare and stuff like that. So those can be helpful in different ways. They're a little dated, but the core theology of them is not.
Some things don't change. Father Chris, thanks for taking some time today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure we'll be talking again. This is Bob Gilligan from the Catholic Conference of Illinois, and thank you for watching or hearing our podcast today. We'll be back soon with another topic to talk about of the many issues that are developing, not only at Springfield at the state capitol, but in Washington, D.C. as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon with another show very briefly.